I'm excited to chat with you. Talk a little bit about your application cycles, what that's looked like for you in the past.
Okay. So I took the Mcat. I went to college, did a post back, took the Mcat, took a year off because, school, and I just kind of wanted like a gap year, I thought. So I took a gap year. I was working for a medical startup during that time, and then I applied to med school. That first cycle, I had a total of 4 interviews, and I got 2 waitlists. And then I reapplied, so that was this most recent cycle, and I applied and I had 1 interview and I had 1 waitlist, and now I'm here.
So you went down in interviews.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
I think so. I guess based on the advice that I've seen on your channel, I think the biggest issue that I did between the first cycle and the second cycle was I tried to sell my skills and I didn't show. I think my first application was more like stories and stuff, and my second application was just more like, hey, look how cool of a doctor I'll be if you let me in. And I think that's really where I dropped the ball, because listening to your advice, it's like, if everyone tells you the same thing, how do you differentiate that? So it's really hard if you don't tell those kind of stories that build that. And so for this year's cycle and application, I really tried to follow that advice and really weave stories in that I thought captured those same skills that I was trying to sell last year.
Okay. Makes sense. When it came to interviewing, it's one thing that I can't really capture on application renovation is how well you interviewed. The fact that you got interviews is good. The fact that you were waitlisted, not so good. Where do you think potentially, or do you think your interviews were strong, weak? Where do you think your interviews were?
I think my interviews my first cycle didn't go as well as I had planned. Again, because I was still in that selling yourself mindset. This year I tried a different approach to my interviews, where I just tried to talk to my interviewer and just share common interests. And if they brought it back to medicine, then, I would talk about it, but I didn't try to shoot medicine into every question that they answered or asked. And I think they went better. But again, I was waitlisted. So,
okay.
Still waitlisted. So
still waitlisted. All right. So let's go ahead and dive into your application and see maybe where we can make some improvements. So I'm going to, let's do that. That should be able to work. So as we're looking at your application, again, one of the things that I love looking at is submission date. We see one of the biggest mistakes, self-inflicted wounds, is applying late to medical school. Here we go, 6/5/2020. You applied early. Good job. Okay. So timing of the application, not a problem. You can see that it was processed 6/25, so not too late after. So as we go through this process, I'll be looking at some things. I've already pre-marked a lot of things that I think potentially stand out, but we'll get there. The first thing that stands out to me is this: mom and dad are doctors.
Yeah.
Okay. And we'll keep coming back to that, because I think that's a huge red flag on your application. Not because mom and dad are doctors, but because of other things in your application that when I see that mom and dad are doctors, I'm going to look harder at your application. Okay. So mom and dad are doctors. That's great. Then we get to grades, and we see freshman year UCLA, looking at a lot of AP credits that transferred over, and then getting into freshman year actual grades, lots of B's, A- there, pass, and B+. Got this C here. So freshman year doesn't look very good right off the bat. On the surface, it looks okay, but when you actually look at what the GPA calculation is, you go, oh, that's not so great, right? And then we continue on. We get another C-, principles of accounting. Good thing you're not an accountant. That's okay. But we see a big change happening kind of this junior year, a little bit sophomore year. And we see that when we get to your grade table here, looking at your upward trend, right? So freshman year, 2.8, you go, oh, that's not so good. But then when you look at sophomore, junior, senior, post-bac, 3.4, 3.6, 379, 388 at close to 105 credits, great upward trend. This is the idea of an upward trend. Your overall GPA is still pretty strong at 358, 361 science. So not that big of a deal, but your post-bac obviously helped get you there. So good job with that upward trend.
Thank you.
Hello, Caleb Marsh watching in the comments. MCAT score, blew it out of the water. Congrats there. Okay, so stats are not the problem. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think that I basically found my way, like through sophomore, junior year, and I was like, oh, this stuff's actually really interesting, and I do want to apply myself to it. And it kind of showed. I mean, I was really interested in what I was learning. And then MCAT, obviously, I knew it was super important because by that time I'd known that I wanted to apply to med school. So studied really hard for it and, made it happen.
Your MCAT 2018, you retaking it for this year?
I'm not retaking it for this cycle because a lot of the schools that I was looking at would take a 4-year MCAT. But if I have to reapply for the next cycle after this, then yeah, I would have to. And that's something I'm considering. I mean, I guess.
Have you already submitted your application?
No. I haven't submitted my new application yet.
Okay. All right. So let's get to activities. So one thing, it's interesting. One thing we usually don't see on the MCAT is the GRE score. You put it on there. No big deal. Probably not taken into account much. So let's look at research. Your first one here. You have research listed, sepsis sequencing research, 105 hours over the course of a year plus. And the things that I highlighted, let's read these. Revolutionary technologies can lead to revolutionary change, but only if they address on the ground realities. Okay, so right off the bat, very generic statement, right? These aren't your words. Well, maybe they are, but it's not who you are.
It doesn't capture my story.
This isn't you, right? This is just your thought about something. Okay. What is next generation sequencing? Okay. Is it a rhetorical question? You want me to answer that? Who's listening? How is it used for infectious disease diagnosis? So we get all of these things that are highlighted are just words that you're saying, but aren't letting me know who you are. All right. If you watch enough application renovation, I'm sorry it gets boring, but I want to know who you are. And the only sentence in here that has you in it is what you're trying to do here. I'm trying to answer these questions through in-depth technical exploration, competitor analysis, and most importantly, interviews with clinicians. Right? There's a little bit of you. Shows me what you're doing. Okay. So the rest of it, super generic, doesn't help me understand who you are. Okay. So then we get to hobbies. I love hobbies in a application. You have this interesting hobby that I don't even know if I would call it a hobby. I'd maybe call it an extracurricular activity because it's not something you're necessarily doing for fun. You're having an impact on these providers, right? These frontline providers, printing out PPE for them, which is awesome. The one thing I highlighted here is this: my dreams had been printed out of plastic. I have no idea what that means. You don't mention dreams anywhere else here that I saw, unless I skipped it over. And so this is where I say typically is like, you got too fancy, right? You're trying to get too fancy here, and I'm just confused. What does this mean? Okay. So that's what we have there. Then we get to community service / volunteer, medical, clinical. And you have COVID-19 test site administrator. And the thing that I highlighted here was my duties were to organize the staff, optimize the testing process, and facilitate patient enrollment. All that to me screams not clinical. That's administrative. That's leadership.
Yeah. And that's something I learned from, your videos. And it was like, oh, that's definitely not clinical. Because I remember watching one about something, and that guy had also listed as clinical. And I was like, oh, mine's kind of in the same vein as this, and it's definitely not clinical. So I should probably reclassify that for this year.
Yeah. Does that kill your application? No, they'll just reclassify it on their end if they want. right? Whatever the school will do. And then I wrote down here, what is your impact? Because when you actually read your most meaningful here, it's really generic of like, well, we did this and our site did this and it was we, and our team did this. And there was really, again, nothing about you and your impact here. Remember, the application is about who you are, not how you as a team did everything together. Okay. So I don't see you. I don't see your impact here. Okay. So we move on. Paid employment, medical, clinical, working in entrepreneurship at a startup doing STD testing or way to democratize STD testing. Again, not medical clinical work. Would you agree?
I mean, yeah, I would say it's more on the business side of things. So yeah, I wouldn't say it's a medical clinical job.
Yeah. Medical clinical, again, for everyone, so there's no confusion. Medical clinical is you are interacting with patients in some sort of minimal clinical way, right? For me, registering patients in the emergency department is not clinical experience. That's admin work. When you're working at the front desk of a clinic, that's admin work, not clinical experience. So there's always some confusion, and we'll get lots of comments saying, well, is this clinical? Is this clinical? Is this clinical? The question that you have to ask yourself is, what am I doing with these patients? Am I interacting with them, sitting next to them, holding their hand, asking them how their day is? Or am I checking them in, telling them to go sit down, and the doctor will be with them in a minute, right? So do your own kind of self-check when you're doing those things to help you understand what's medical clinical. Just because you are in a clinical environment, just because you are studying something in a medical world, that doesn't make it clinical. Okay. That's what schools are looking for here. So it sounds awesome. Sounds like a great startup. Sounds like great experience, just not clinical experience. Okay. And that looked like a bulk of your time here, obviously, going over the course of a couple of years. We get to some research. FDA orphan drug designation proposal looks great. No issues there. Healthcare disparities research. Dean's list. I really liked your Dean's list description here. A lot of people would have just said, oh, I got Dean's list, but you told a little story of how you got there and looked great. We get to some more community service, being a tour guide. Again, not medical clinical. You listed that one appropriately. Some hobbies, some vegetables and herb cultivations. Gotta love that. And so we get lots of interesting experiences here, lots of research, lots of entrepreneur experience, lots of potentially leadership here. We get to this national bid for mock trial. And again, I'm confused here. I don't understand what support helped me grow more than harsh criticism means. I don't really know what national's bid for mock trial is. You're applying to medical school. I see this like trial coach and lawyer, and I'm super confused. I'm like, did you think you were applying to medical school or law school? And so for me, there just wasn't enough description here of why I'm reading this, which is kind of a common mistake of students taking my stories a little bit too far. I still need context, right? And we get to some philanthropy here. I liked the numbers here of how much you were able to raise. And we get to some actual medical clinical work here, working in the doctor's office, ER volunteer. But the last time you did it was November of 2018, right? Lots of hours, but over the course of 5 years total, with really a few month stints here and there. So not super consistent. Potentially looks like you were checking the box and you're like, okay, I'm done. And then when you look at the description, again, all just generalizations. The ER is a chaotic, awe-inspiring place. Yes, it is. Doesn't tell me anything about you. You saw doctors do this. Great. Doesn't tell me anything about you. Okay. So just all generalizations. Again, I don't know who you are when I'm reading this. Okay. More hobbies. So I think this is your third hobby potentially on here. So lots of hobbies. Yeah. And when I see 3 hobbies, then I'm like, what's this person been up to? Because usually students don't have room for 3 hobbies. And then publications. Okay. And you have publication here listed in 2012, which if I did my math correctly and go back up to when you started freshman year, you were still in high school then.
Yeah, I was.
So in general, the rule of thumb is leave high school stuff off of the application.
Okay.
Again, it's not an application destroyer. I'll just scratch my head going, wait, didn't you get the memo? No high school stuff on the application. So what I see is an application that we get to a place where you have great stats. Stats aren't holding you back. You have really good experiences. Entrepreneurial experiences, leadership experiences, your hobbies, all of that stuff looks great. You have some clinical experience. I don't really know what you did or how you impacted the world or how it impacted you in any way, because what you wrote about was very general.
Mm-hmm.
It's not listed as a most meaningful, so probably not very meaningful to you. And so what I'm left with after looking at your activity section is a student who has 2 parents who are doctors, but has not explored medicine himself. That's
kind of
the
looks
biggest
like
problem.
It looks like the whole push into medicine thing.
Say that again?
It looks like your parents pushed you into medicine kind of thing.
Either that, or you're just kind of riding off of their coattails going, well, my mom and dad like their job, so I might as well do what they're doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. I have zero knowledge of you having shadowing experience. It's not on your application. I have no track record of you actually getting consistent clinical experience, consistently putting yourself around patients, which is allowing yourself and proving to yourself that you want to be around patients, and then proving to the medical schools, hey, look, I enjoy this. This is what I want to spend my time with. And you can see that in my duration of activities, my not necessarily total hours, but just the prolonged and consistent nature of the timeline being around patients. Okay. So
yeah,
I get through your activity section. If I were an AdCon member, I would just move on. And that's potentially what's happening with you. You're getting some interviews. And so somebody is, in my mind, they're overlooking that. And they're going, okay, he doesn't have any clinical experience or hasn't had clinical experience recently, but these other things are intriguing and he has good stats. So I'm going to take a chance and bring him in. Hopefully he's done enough self-reflection to understand why he wants to be a physician. And we're definitely going to ask him that in his interview. And if his answer isn't good enough, we're going to waitlist him. And that's most likely what has happened to you. My assumption is that your why do you want to be a doctor hasn't improved much outside of your personal statement. And so when you go on your interviews and say, hey, here's why I want to be a doctor, there's just no connection there to reality, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. And medical schools just don't want to risk that shot on you. So when we get to your personal statement, you have this teamwork and technology theme that you tried to weave throughout. You brought it up in the beginning. You brought it up at the end. This first paragraph here, again, just kind of very generic of this technology and teamwork stuff that you're trying to prove why you want to be a doctor, right? You're proving why you want to be a doctor is I want to be a doctor to provide compassionate care through teamwork and technology. But you haven't proven to me that you actually like giving care to people. So automatically, I just dismiss it as you're just saying what you think you need to say. Okay. Mm-hmm. And then we get to a little bit about who you are, talking about your mom, talking about your dad. This is your personal statement. This is not an essay about your mom and dad. Okay. And then very cliche kind of things for students to write about is this puzzle kind of theme. I wanted to understand how things worked and understand why. I was a tinkerer, computers, right? It's a very common cliche of like, oh, as a doctor, I need to be inquisitive. I need to understand why things work. I really need to ask all these questions. I need to understand how it's put together. All right, and so you're just adding into those cliches that like I do enjoy understanding and asking questions and wanting to know why things are the way they are. Okay? That doesn't make me understand why you want to be a physician. That just makes me understand that you are inquisitive, which is great. But that's just foundational stuff that you need to have, and I'll see that inquisitiveness come through in your application and other places, but not in your personal statement for me. And then we get, thankfully, experience has shown me that connection with other humans gives life its true color, which is why I want to become a physician. So again, just a very generic statement here. I want to be a doctor because connection gives humans its true color, life its true color. That to me doesn't mean anything about healthcare or medicine. Right? Connection is generic. You can connect in any profession. Okay, so I'm 2 paragraphs in. I'm still scratching my head. Who are you? Why do you want to be a doctor? And then you get to Cub Tours Guide, right? This is not related to medicine at all. You already talked about it in your activity section. I don't understand why it really needs to be in your personal statement. What was your idea putting it in your personal statement?
So at the time when I first wrote this, I mean, so it was a year ago now, I was basically trying to show that, like, I guess like the evolution of my personality, that like originally, like I was this very closed, like, you know, computer building kid. And then I go to UCLA and I like kind of expand beyond my shell and I like start connecting with other people. So that's what I used it for. In my new personal statement, I obviously, you know, shortened it a lot because like you said, I felt like it didn't really add that much to my personal statement. So I took a lot of it out this time.
Yeah, I would say take it all out. It doesn't belong in your personal statement. You're trying to show intellect. You're trying to show that you understand inequalities. You're trying to prove these things. And I'm just asking the question, why do you want to be a doctor? All right, that's all I care about at this point. Why do you want to be a doctor? Help me understand why you're here. I know you're smart enough. You have great experiences that you can probably add a ton, but I need to know why you want to be a doctor, because I just truly want to make sure that we're not going to accept someone who 3 months in, 6 months in, 3 years in, or even post-graduation realizes, oh my gosh, medicine has nothing to do with what I want to do with my life. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We don't need those physicians in our world. So then you get to Dr. Singh, a research mentor. Again, the story that you're telling here is again about curiosity. It's about using data and machine learning and just selling these skills and these kind of wanting to dive deeper and understanding the whole story, which goes back to this earlier thing about understanding why and being a tinkerer, right? This is just an extension of that. Right?
Yeah.
We get your post back here, working at this medical diagnostic startup. Again, it's in your activities section. This doesn't necessarily add to why you want to be a doctor. It's just, hey, this is another thing that I did. You talk about leadership, right? So you're very focused on skills here of, hey, being a physician, you got to be a good leader. And, oh, look, I learned leadership at this place. Okay. Again, not what the personal statement should be about, in my opinion. Technology improvements must be rooted in life's realities, blah, 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 blah. So again, lots of generic statements here. Again, very focused on this technology aspect because that's the theme that you kind of went with. And at the end of the day, it's just admin and leadership stuff. Again, you're trying to sell these skills. And again, I'm left with, why do you want to be a doctor? And then the final conclusion here of technology and teamwork can lift communities up. So you're stuck with this theme, which is why I don't recommend themes for students, because you pigeonhole yourself and you're stuck with this narrative that just usually doesn't work. And so we get to a point where I'm left with, you're smart enough, right? You're smart enough, but I don't see any passion for medicine. I see passion for technology. I see a passion for understanding and asking questions, but I see zero passion for wanting to be a physician. And when a student has two parents who are physicians, I'm going to look extra hard to go, I need to make sure that you have done your own research on this and really tested this life out for you through shadowing and clinical experience. And those are important for every student. But when it comes to students who have a parent, and in your case, two parents who are physicians, unfortunately, it gets held against you a little bit. Is like, why are you doing this for you? And I have zero clue. I have no idea why you want to do this. And so between last application cycle and this next application cycle, which is happening right now, do you have any new shadowing?
Yeah, actually. So the ER experience was actually a shadowing experience in retrospect. In my first application, I had listed like a story that I had with this young girl who had some kind of like cardiac arrhythmia and had to be flown out. Currently right now I work as a clinical research coordinator at Cedars. So I'm writing about that as one of my most meaningfuls. And
how long have you been doing that?
Since July of so like in the pandemic, July 2020.
Okay. So
yeah.
And how much are you doing that? Is that a full-time gig?
Yeah, it's a full-time job.
Okay. So great. So you'll have a couple thousand hours that you can put on your application where you're actually around patients finally. And clinical research coordinator is one of those special positions where a lot of your job is shadowing, because you're just waiting for the doctor to do their thing as you're kind of with the patient, depending on your specific situation. But it's one where you could potentially subtract out some of those hours from your clinical research coordinator activity and add that into a separate shadowing activity. So at least it's on your application as shadowing. Do you think being a clinical research coordinator has given you more insights and more connection with patients so that you can reflect on that deeper and understand why you're doing this?
Absolutely. Yeah. That's one thing that like I really took away from my job was, just interact, because a lot of my job is like also talking to patients and like seeing how they're doing, because I work in cardiology research. So it's about seeing like walking with them for 6 minutes. And, obviously when you're walking with someone for 6 minutes, you kind of spark a conversation and people remember you and you're like, oh, hey, how's your son doing? How's this going on? So it's definitely given me a lot of stories to talk about. Actually, yesterday I was at work and a lady was getting her blood drawn. I noticed that she was kind of like apprehensive about it because, who likes getting a needle poked in them? So I quickly asked her, I was like, name your top 3 favorite foods. And so that was something that I was like, oh, like that's something that I could write about potentially in my application is, just being aware of those kind of situations and trying to like, distract patients and make the experience less uncomfortable for them, because nobody likes going to a hospital. So yeah.
Now you have the experience to actually be able to talk about and reflect on, which is perfect. So let's do a little mini mock interview here and tell me, why do you want to be a doctor?
So I want to be a doctor because I have worked within the medical system. I started a medical startup. I wanted to expand accessibility to care because that was something that I was really passionate about. When I first started at UCLA, I saw that there were a lot of inequalities in society. And so I was interested in a life science career and I wanted to help fix those inequalities in society. I went to a post-bac program where I tried exploring some life science careers. And I thought that I could help like democratize care and increase access to care by working in a company or like a startup or something like that. And I realized that route was more focused on profits and like, the alignment wasn't necessarily with patient interest. And so from then I transitioned into more of a clinical research setting where I've had a chance to really talk with patients and, hear their stories. And ultimately I just want to I've worked on, I guess I've had experiences on both sides of the area where I've seen like the the push towards like very new age technologies like CAR T cells, and seeing how unattainable those can be for like the average person who's underinsured or uninsured. And I want to help bridge that gap because my mom has multiple sclerosis, and her medication, I mean, without insurance would be astronomical. And I'm sure there are people in this country who have to face that reality where their loved one has a chronic disease and it's not, they can't afford the medication to keep that chronic disease in check. And it causes their loved one a lot of pain. But then it also ends up hurting us and as a society in general, because we have a lot of people who are sick and showing up in the ER with injuries that are chronic and they become acute. And that was something that I saw through my shadowing experience when I was shadowing the ER, was a lot of people coming in for, we had a lady who had schizophrenia who came in and she had run out of her medication and she had to show up in the ER and she had a mental break in the ER. We had a couple diabetic foot ulcers. It was stuff like that that I was like, the healthcare system just doesn't seem like it's working as efficiently as it could. And it's causing a lot of people a lot of unnecessary pain. And that's something that I'm passionate about fixing, because I don't think that's fair to everyone, because everyone deserves to live and have healthcare.
Yeah. So much better answer in terms of kind of your path, because now I understand a little bit of like, oh, the tech startup world, not connecting enough with patient care and impacting patients directly. And now you have the experience of going to patient care and being able to reflect on that. So it's a much stronger answer. One of the things that I talk about all the time is the seed. What is your seed? Right. And something you just completely avoided and just jumped to, like, I want to help with inequalities. What led you to that? And I know the answer because your parents are doctors, and you may think, well, they don't really have any impact on me, but they did, right?
Yeah, they absolutely did.
And so I think that potentially could be a part of your answer of, and just a short part, right? You don't have to go on and on about your parents because this is about you. But obviously seeing from a young age, potentially hanging out at the doctor's office, waiting for mom or dad to be done with work so you could go home, hearing them talk about patients, whatever that is for you, I would add a little bit of that into your story, because that is your story.
Yeah.
That's what exposed you to this whole world to begin with, and then build on that.
So Dr. Gray, I actually approached that from a different angle. I mean, more of a truthful angle, really, because so I wrote about that in my new personal statement. The start was basically like, I saw how medicine took my parents away from me because they were in residency. They were so busy all the time. And it actually pushed me away from medicine, because for the longest time, I didn't actually want to be a doctor. When I was going through college, I was like, this isn't for me. I want to do something else. But that's the kind of, like, I guess not theme, but like, that's kind of like my story is basically, I saw like the toll it took on our family, the strain it put, just not seeing my dad for like an entire weekend and just being like, all right, cool. And so, yeah, I know. And so what do you think about that? Because that's more of a truthful answer for me, is that I saw the effect medicine had on my parents, and it pushed me away from being a doctor. I went to UCLA. I was part of Cub Tours. I saw that there was these inequalities, and I liked life sciences. I went to KGI, where I did, a post-bac and learned more about the medical field and innovation. But I was also volunteering while I was there, and I saw.
Let's pause there. So I never hear students go to a post-bac program, spend X number of $1,000s to go to a post-bac program because they're exploring a career. Usually it's, I'm going to a post-bac program because I know I need a bigger upward trend in my grades so that I can apply and get into medical school. Are you telling me you went to KGI not knowing if you were going to go to medical school?
To be truthful, at that time I wanted to go to medical school, but I just thought I didn't have the grades.
Well, exactly. So that's where I'm calling BS on your story, because you're like, I saw these inequalities, so I went to KGI to explore these things, and that's not true. People go to post-bacs to get into medical school or PA school or whatever.
Okay, yeah.
So there's a piece missing there for you, and you just need to reflect on that and figure out where that story fits a little bit better, more truthfully to your path.
Okay.
It's interesting. Okay. What are your thoughts looking at this application, knowing that you have another application to submit now?
I think personally, So that was something, I mean, when I got waitlisted, I kind of like realized by like the early May, I was like, ooh, I'm probably not going to get in off this wait list. So I started looking into revamping my application. And a friend of mine had suggested your YouTube channel like during my first application cycle. And so I started watching a lot of your videos. And so I revamped a lot of my application, you know, weaving in those stories, you know, trying to basically show, not tell. Because again, I feel like looking back at this application now, I'm like, yeah, I honestly, reading my personal statement myself, I'm just like, does this guy want to go into healthcare tech, or like why is he applying to med school? Like, he's a great guy. Like, he's not, you know, he wants to make a difference, but I'm not sure this is for him. So that's like, I tried to reframe it around that and kind of constructing my story. And I mean, I'm more confident, but then again, I was also confident last year. So I guess we'll see.
Yeah. I think really the biggest missing piece for you was the lack of experiences, lack of shadowing, lack of clinical experience, lack of being around patients that really left you missing out on being able to reflect on those things, something that you're able to do now. So that was really my biggest concern is if you said, yeah, I'm applying again this year and I haven't done anything, I would say, don't stop the insanity, right? Don't do that again. Take some time, get the experiences. But it's great that you've got those experiences now, and you've had them for a prolonged period of time, even during the pandemic, which is great. You were able to do that. Did you get any feedback from the schools post interview, post waitlist? Did you reach out and try to ask for anything?
We have too many applicants. We can't do anything. And I was like, yeah, well, again, I guess I'll apply.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's the standard answer. I wish schools could do that. Some people want to know what your school list looked like. Honestly, it's not important, but it was a lot of schools. So school list was not the problem. It really is just the story there that wasn't able to connect. What questions do you have for me?
So I was wondering, what do you think separates a student from being waitlisted versus getting accepted? Is it the story, you think, like just forming a cohesive argument?
Yeah, I think if I were to be a betting man, my guess is that the schools where you got interviews, again, trusted that you were smart enough. There was no concern there. Saw that you had some interesting experiences that potentially would be a good add to the class, but had questions about your desire to be a physician. And they're like, let's take a risk. Let's invite this person for an interview and let's chat with them. And if they still have no clue why they're doing this, if their story doesn't really connect, then we'll waitlist them. So that was my assumption for what happened with you, getting 3 interviews total across 2 application cycles, and then the 3 waitlists. Is that why do you want to be a doctor story? And then again, potentially you may just be a horrible interviewer, which I don't know. But you just on the spot here, you were perfectly fine having a conversation with me. So I doubt that's the problem, but just understand that interview skills are important as well. And remembering that the interview is very a conversational thing. It sounds like you made some of those adjustments for your interview last cycle. And so just continue that.
And another question that I had was, how do you feel that you can, like, how do you tell a cohesive story between your primary and your secondary applications? Because I was wondering if maybe I'm falling flat on my secondaries too. Like,
yeah. And this is where kind of my advice is always sounds contradictory. The primary application, I think, is your opportunity to tell your story of who you are. The secondary applications is to answer the darn question. Too many students try to get way too fancy with secondary applications, and they don't answer the question. If the question is, what are you going to bring to our class? Then answer, what am I going to bring to the class? I was reviewing a secondary yesterday, and it was literally that question of like, we love diversity here and different experiences. And what experiences have you had that are going to add to our classmates or your classmates, right? And the answer sounded great. And I was with my Application Academy group, and they're like, oh, that's a great answer. It answers the question. I'm like, does it? Because the answer was all around, these are the experiences I've had. I speak a different language. I come from another country, whatever the answer was. And it was all twisted to answer the question, how is that going to help your patients? But that wasn't the question. The question is, how are you going to ask your classmates? And the student was so focused on being diverse and coming from another country and living in all these different places is really going to help me as a physician and help my patients. All right. Answer the question. I think students try too hard having these themes and making sure that the story connects from primary to secondary to interview. Really, at the end of the day, your passion is your theme. And obviously the things that you are spending your time with are going to be your quote theme, because that's just what you do and what you like talking about. But I don't think you need to force that narrative into every nook and cranny.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then when you were reviewing my application, you mentioned that it's like possible to story tell too much. You mentioned that for one of the extracurriculars. What do you mean by that? Because I don't want to fall into that trap this year then.
Yeah. Do you remember which one that was?
If I could see it again, I might be able to remember.
So if we look at here, I think you were talking about not the storytelling too much. Where that came up was this one, this mock trial one.
Oh yeah, the context. Like what
context?
Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah. So sometimes students take my storytelling advice a little bit too far, and they will start a story. It'll be like, I was a volunteer at the hospital, and it'll start with a story, and it will just be the whole story. And I don't get any reflection. I don't understand who they are, what they did. I just get this weird interaction with a patient. And it's just one isolated event that, sure, it's a pretty little story, but I have no clue who you are and what you did. And so adding a little bit of context is important in those situations. Now, do you need context as an EMT, as a scribe? Probably not, right? Because I know what scribes do. I know what EMTs do. And so use your judgment and read it and go, do they understand what I'm doing in this story? Do they understand who I am in this big picture of the hospital in this setting? And if the answer is no, and ask some other people potentially too, just spend a sentence on setting up the context and then dive into a story if a story fits. And remember, not every experience is going to have a story. You don't need to have a flowery story for everything. Again, that's again advice that gets taken out of context a lot of times, or just misconstrued, or I don't give enough context to it, is you don't need a story for everything. Sometimes it just doesn't work, and that's okay too.